Shabbat Shalom. This is Daniel John Lee with Torah Restoration Ministries. It is the Sabbath day, Sabbath morning, Saturday, September 16th, 2017. The last Sabbath before Feast of Trumpets 2017, which starts Thursday, Wednesday night, September 20th to Thursday night, September 21st, will be the Feast of Yom Teruah, the Feast of Shouting, which every year we celebrate to look forward to that great day that Paul talks about, when Yahshua will descend with a great trump, the last trump, and the dead Messiah will rise first, and then we, which are alive and remain, will be caught up together with them in our new, transformed, resurrected bodies to meet Yahshua in the clouds. And so shall we ever be with him. Hallelujah. And so I think it's very appropriate that with the Feast of Trumpets and what it all stands for and what it points toward, that wonderful, great resurrection of the righteous, that I should finally give this teaching, which is so prevalent right now in the Messianic Hebrew Roots movement, taught by Monte Judah and many others, many different strains and forms of this teaching, but it's generally known as the Greater Exodus teaching, and I need to expose the deception of this teaching. In the Messianic and Hebrew Roots movements, there is a teaching known as the Greater Exodus, which says that once tribulation hits, those who follow Yah will be called to go out to meet Yahshua somewhere in the wilderness. I've heard one teacher claim it will be Mount Sinai. However, Yahshua clearly said he would not return until you see him as lightning strikes from the east to the west, and only then, when all see him coming in the clouds of glory, will his elect be gathered unto him in the sky. There are literally hundreds of passages to support this, but this particular one from Mark chapter 13 does an excellent job of showing the order of prophetic events. And I'm reading from Mark 13, starting in verse 21. And if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, or Lo, he is there, believe him not. For false Christs and false prophets shall rise, and shall show signs and wonders to seduce, if it were possible, even the elect. But take ye heed, behold, I have foretold you all things. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then shall he send his angels, and shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost part of the earth to the uttermost part of heaven. So that clearly outlines the events there. Notice how there's no mention of any sort of greater exodus. Now, we do read of a very specific exodus in Revelation chapter 12, where a woman, clothed with sun and crowned with 12 stars, is borne up on eagle's wings, where she finds her place in the wilderness for 1,260 days and is nourished by Yah. However, this is to a very specific group of people that, as chapter 12 notes, does not include the many who even keep the testimony of Yahshua and walk in his commandments, for the dragon begins persecuting them after the woman escapes into this mysterious safe place in the wilderness. Most people who espouse this greater Exodus deception do not seem to be referring to Revelation chapter 12. They seem to say that, in fact, our salvation is not, as Paul wrote so eloquently in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, in Messiah gathering us together with him in the air in our new resurrected bodies, but instead we're somehow physically going to go meet with Messiah somewhere on earth in our mortal bodies, pre-resurrected bodies. I've heard some snidely and sarcastically reject the Christian doctrine of the rapture in justifying this. While it is true that the Christian doctrine of the rapture is not exactly correct, it does have some basis in the Word, which we can see from Daniel chapter 12 and from 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and from 1 Thessalonians 4 and from Revelation chapter 10 and 11. Clearly, whether the Christian doctrine of the rapture is correct or not, we will be caught into the sky and meet Yahshua in the air in our transformed, resurrected bodies. And that will be our first encounter with the Messiah. We won't be going off into some wilderness area to find the Messiah, for that is exactly what Yahshua warns against in Mark chapter 13. So I think it's just very important to realize that this teaching, this Greater Exodus teaching, unless they're specifically referring to this Revelation 12 gathering, which again, read Revelation 12. It says that after this woman goes in the wilderness, that those who remain, those who literally are keeping the commandments and keep the testimony of Yahshua, the dragon begins to persecute and makes war and prevails against the saints during the Great Tribulation. So unless they're specifically referring to this Revelation 12 Exodus, there is no Greater Exodus type of teaching, okay? We're not going to go out to some wilderness area and find the Messiah on earth before we're resurrected. No way. That is a deception from the pit of hell. And will probably lead many people to follow false Christs and false messiahs and to perish in their sins. So, yeah, so this whole Greater Exodus teaching, what I think it's a replacement for the resurrection, the first resurrection. It's a replacement doctrine. Because, again, I hear many people saying, oh, yeah, there's no, they're so anti-rapture. And again, there is a lot of deception in the modern Christian day understanding of the rapture. I grant that. I'm not saying there's not. But there's so much rejection against that they've gone to the other extreme where they don't even believe in getting caught up in our immortal bodies to meet Yahshua. They think we're going to go meet him somewhere out in the wilderness in some area. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's totally ridiculous and totally anti-scriptural. In fact, all the verses that they use, if you listen to Monte Judah's teaching or some of these others, all these verses that they use, they're actually referring to the seventh trumpet resurrection that Paul talks about in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15, this last trumpet that blows during the end of the tribulation, which we get caught up to be with Yahshua. Because all these verses, like in Ezekiel that you find, Jeremiah, Isaiah, they're talking about his people being gathered unto him. But it's all, it's all basically Old Testament, or I should say Tanakh, First Covenant, prophetic references to that last trumpet resurrection of being gathered together to him. All right. Well, I hope this clears up that deception. And again, I think it's very appropriate we talk about this because now we're less than a week away from the Feast of Trumpets, which we've been celebrating this for thousands of years. Those who are Israel have been celebrating this for thousands of years because it points toward the next major prophetic event, which is us, well, first, the dead in Messiah rising up and meeting him in the air, Yahshua, and then we who are alive and remain get caught up with them to meet Yahshua in the clouds. And we're to comfort one another with these words. And so it's a beautiful feast. In fact, I would say Yom Teruah is one of my favorite all-time feasts. In Pentecost, Shavuot, the Spirit came down and filled us. And in Yom Teruah, the very next feast, we get caught up by the Spirit in our mortal bodies to go up in the air, in the opposite direction, to go up to Yahshua. It's a beautiful, beautiful mirror picture. Hallelujah. This is Daniel John Lee with Torah Restoration Ministries. Website is www.spiritandtorah.com. Shabbat Shalom.